How do I begin my novel? How do I start my first chapter? Where do I begin? Most authors have been told that when starting your first chapter, you always need to begin with a hook, something to draw your readers in immediately. And for years, I, Elizabeth Griffin, the Black romance writer, have used that approach in all of my storytelling. However, in doing research for my platforms and for my channels giving advice on writing, I have discovered that there are so many different ways to begin a story. Yes, you can use the hook approach, but there are also other ways or other approaches that you can incorporate with the hook in order to begin your first chapter. Well, according to Jeff Gerke, an award-winning editor of fiction and nonfiction writing and the author of multiple books, there are 4 primary approaches for beginning a successful novel. Probably more, including some highly experimental ones, but these are the classic main 4. Run your story idea through the filter of each of these and see if one of them feels right for your book. According to Jeff Gerke's online article for the Writer's Digest, which was published November the 25th, 2014, the first approach is the prologue beginning. A prologue is an episode that pertains to your story, but does not include the hero, or includes the hero at a time well before the story begins. Perhaps when he is a child. It might not be chapter 1 per se, but it can serve as a legitimate opening if it works. For example, the film Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. I often use films and television examples when I teach because they illustrate so perfectly the concepts of storytelling and are so universal. The film Pirate of the Caribbean begins with a prologue in which 2 of our main heroes first meet each other as children. Our heroes are on stage, but they're not at the age they'll be for the story proper. A prologue can establish why things are as they are in the world of your story and why the character is the way he is when the main action begins. And a prologue can even hint at or reveal the danger that will soon sweep over the hero's life. There are, however, writers, anti-prologuers, who don't agree with beginning a chapter with a prologue. And their reasons are no one reads prologues, or prologues are just dumping grounds for backstory. I agree with Jeff Gerke in that you should try these approaches, see if they work, and if they do, use them. If not, discard them and try something new. He also states that the hero action beginning is another way to begin your first chapter. In a hero action beginning, the hero is on stage doing something active and interesting related to the launching of the core story. It need not involve explosions and car chases, but it certainly can. Nearly every James Bond story begins with 007 performing some amazing daring do. The hero action beginning is the other most common way to begin a story. Only the rarest of story ideas can't manage a hero action beginning. Unless your hero is catatonic or incarcerated in a hole or the like, I'm certain you can come up with something interesting for him to do at the beginning of the story. But if your hero isn't a hero yet, or isn't in a position to show it, or if you simply prefer to establish your villain and time bomb in a prologue, perhaps the hero action beginning isn't right for your book. Don't force a hero action beginning. We all can make up something for our heroes to do as the book begins, but if it feels like a stretch or a cliche, choose another approach. The third approach to writing your first chapter is the in medias res beginning. In medias res is a Latin phrase meaning in the middle of things. It's one of the less common ways to begin a novel, but it can definitely be effective. With in medias res, you start at a point in the story, show a bit of activity to intrigue the reader, and then jump back to an earlier, quieter part in the story. It's the opposite of the prologue beginnings that show an earlier episode from the hero's life. In this case, you show a later episode, and then you hit the rewind button and spend some or all of the rest of the book catching up to that moment. The film version of One Day, based on David Nichols' novel of the same name, starring Anne Hathaway, uses the in medias res beginning. It opens with Anne's character happily riding a bicycle through the streets of Paris. Then we jump back about 20 years. It's a long time before we catch up to her joyride. Why isn't in medias res used more often? Part of the reason is because it can be perceived as a gimmick. Sometimes it gives readers the same rip-off feeling that they get when they read a novel that begins with a dream. It can also sacrifice suspense for the whole portion of the story until you catch up with the first moment. Think about it. If you see the main character alive and well in what you now realize is a future moment, how nervous are you going to be when she gets into danger? I mean, you know she lives, right? At least up until the in medias res moment. An in medias res opening can deflate the tension the way a hole deflates a tire. However, there is a benefit to in medias res. Once you catch up with the opening moment, especially if it takes a long time to get there, the reader is given an injection of adrenaline. Before now, everything has been relatively safe. It's been within the protective confines of a story time, when you know the hero is fine. But when you get to that moment, and especially when you surpass it, everything changes dramatically. The final major way of beginning your first chapter is to use a frame device. In this, your story is bookended on the front and back, and usually a few instances in the middle, by a story that is outside the main story. The primary tale is framed by the other story. The Princess Bride, the novel and the film, both of which were written by William Goldman, is a frame device story. The movie begins with a kid playing a video game. He's staying home from school because he's sick. His grandfather comes over and offers to read the boy a book to pass the time. Whenever he reads the book, the movie switches over to the main story, a fantasy swashbuckling adventure. Throughout the story, we cut back to the grandfather and the boy, where we get commentary on the story and see a bond developing between them. Then it's back to the fantasy world. The movie ends in the modern day as well. Another example of a film that uses the frame device is Titanic. The story the audience cares most about is the historical tale of Rose and Jack and Cal on board the doomed ocean liner. But we assess that story through the device of an old woman, Rose, in the present. There's a minor story going on in the modern day. They're searching for a jewel she had while on the ship. But the real drama is the historical part. Now and then, during the story, we cut back to old Rose, and the movie also ends with her. But our interest is in the other set of circumstances. Jeff Gerke offers reasons why the frame device could be useful. If perhaps you're telling a story that is not truly interesting or may not grab your reader immediately, you may want to encase it in another story. Another great thing about the frame device is that you can use it to make large jumps in time in your primary story. If you need to jump 10 years, just cut back to the frame story and have the narrator explain the time jump. I truly enjoyed this article by Jeff Gerke, and I suggest that you check out his books, The First 50 Pages, and Write Your Novel in a Month.